It was the summer of 1944. Europe burned from the skies, cities lay in ruins, and every heartbeat across the continent echoed with fear. Millions of soldiers marched, fought, and fell, and yet some of the most extraordinary heroes of that war never held a gun at all. Hidden behind the front lines, beneath layers of secrecy, the United States Army had created a unit unlike any other in history. A unit built not for combat, but for deception. Its mission was to trick, confuse, and mislead the enemy. Its official name, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. But the men inside it would later be remembered by a simpler name, the Ghost Army. They were not ordinary soldiers. Many had once been artists, painters, sound engineers, stage designers, and architects. They came from the classrooms of New York art schools, from the theaters of Broadway, and from the design rooms of fashion houses. They carried sketchbooks instead of rifles, microphones instead of grenades. Their greatest weapon was imagination. In total, there were around 1,100 men, and yet through illusion, they would make the German army believe they were over 30,000 strong. They created entire fake divisions, complete with tanks, camps, and convoys that existed only in the minds of their enemies. They used rubber tanks, life-size inflatable, Shermans that looked perfectly real from a distance. They used cardboard artillery, painted trucks, and canvas airplanes that could be lifted by 4 men. They built fake camps with fake kitchens, fake laundry lines, even fake soldiers carved from wood. At night, they rolled out enormous speakers, each one capable of projecting the sound of hundreds of armored vehicles for miles. They played real recordings of troop movements and tank engines, mixed and mastered by sound technicians who had once worked in the movie industry before the war. A single jeep could sound like an entire convoy. German reconnaissance teams saw the camps. They heard the engines. They intercepted fake radio traffic, and they believed every single thing they saw and heard. That belief saved thousands of real Allied lives. The Ghost Army was led by Colonel Harry Reeder, a strategist who understood that the mind of the enemy could be as powerful a battlefield as any city in Europe. Among his men were names that would later shape the world of art and design. Bill Blass, who became one of America's most famous fashion designers, and Ellsworth Kelly, who would later transform modern art. But back then, they were simply soldiers, armed with paint, sound, and courage. Their only goal, to confuse Hitler's army, to make them move in the wrong direction, to make them afraid of ghosts. It was the spring of 1943. Inside British intelligence headquarters in London, a plan was being drawn on a single piece of paper, a plan so bold, so unexpected, that it could change the course of the war itself. It would later be known as Operation Mincemeat, the mission to deceive Adolf Hitler, to make him defend the wrong country. At that time, the Allies were preparing to invade Sicily, but German forces were heavily entrenched in southern Europe. If the Germans discovered the target, thousands of Allied soldiers would die before reaching the shore. So British intelligence created a plan that sounded like something from a detective novel. They would drop a dead body off the coast of Spain. A man dressed as a British officer, carrying false documents suggesting that the Allies were going to invade Greece, not Sicily. The body would wash ashore, to be accidentally discovered by Spanish officials, who, as expected, would hand the documents to German intelligence. That was the plan, and it worked. The operation was led by Ewan Montague and Charles Cholmondeley of British Naval Intelligence. They used the body of a man who had died from pneumonia in London. They preserved it carefully, dressed it in the uniform of a Royal Marine, and gave him a false identity, Major William Martin. In his pockets they placed the story of a life, forged love letters, a photograph of a fiancé who never existed, a receipt for an engagement ring, and a set of official documents stamped top secret. On April 30th, 1943, the body was released from a submarine off the coast of Huelva, Spain. Within days, it was found by local fishermen and handed to Spanish authorities. As planned, the documents made their way to German intelligence. When Hitler's staff read them, they believed every word. He ordered reinforcements toward Greece and Sardinia, exactly what British intelligence wanted. When the real Allied invasion of Sicily began on July 9th, the beaches were far less defended than anyone expected. The deceptionist was perfect. Operation Mincemeat became one of the most successful intelligence operations in modern history. It was so secret that even the pilots who helped carry out the mission never learned the truth. Not until the 1950s did the world finally hear the story. When Ewan Montague published his book, The Man Who Never Was, behind that clever trick was a deeper reminder of how strange and how human war could be. A single dead man, a stranger, had unknowingly helped turn the tide of history. By 1944, deception had become one of the Allies' greatest weapons. But while intelligence officers played with information, soldiers on the front lines fought a very different battle, one that was chemical. In Germany, the Nazi army began distributing a new kind of pill to its troops. It was called Pervitin, methamphetamine. These tablets kept soldiers awake for days. They erased fear, hunger, and exhaustion, but they also destroyed the mind. When Germany invaded France in 1940, millions of Pervitin pills were issued to tank crews and pilots. They called them Stuka tablets, named after the dive bombers that terrorized Europe. Commanders believed the drug made soldiers faster, sharper, and more obedient. At first, it seemed to work. Troops marched for 70 hours without rest. Pilots flew endless missions. But soon, the side effects became devastating. Men collapsed from exhaustion. They hallucinated, panicked, and many became addicted. Doctors began reporting cases of heart failure, nervous breakdowns, and madness. Yet by that point, the army was addicted too. Entire divisions operated under the influence of methamphetamine, a chemical that would haunt Germany for decades after the war. Across the front lines, other nations followed the same path. The U.S. military used Benzedrine to keep soldiers awake and alert. War was no longer purely physical. It had become psychological. It had become chemical. By 1945, as the Allies closed in on Berlin, the consequences were visible everywhere. Exhausted, broken, addicted soldiers fought to their final breath, their humanity stripped away by the same empire that had promised them glory. And yet, amid all that chaos, there was still room for miracles. One man proved it. His name, Nicholas Alcemade, a 21-year-old British airman, serving as a tail gunner on a Lancaster bomber. On the night of March 24, 1944, his plane was hit by German fire over Berlin. Flames ripped through the fuselage. His parachute caught fire. There was no way out. Rather than burn alive, Alcemade made the unthinkable choice. He jumped, without a parachute, from 18,000 feet in the air. As he fell, he lost consciousness, but fate had a plan. He crashed through pine trees covered in snow. The branches slowed his fall. He landed in a deep snowbank. When he woke up, his leg was injured, but he was alive. He had survived a fall from the sky without a parachute. Even the Germans who captured him were in disbelief. They confirmed his story and called it a miracle. Nicholas Alcemade spent the rest of the war in a prisoner camp, and when the war ended, he returned home, known forever as the man who fell from heaven and lived. As the flames of war began to fade, a new dawn rose over Europe. The cities that once thundered with artillery now stood in silence. The air smelled of smoke and rebirth. Victory had come, but at a terrible cost. Tens of millions were dead, entire nations were scarred, and among the ruins lay not just buildings, but broken souls. The Ghost Army had completed its mission. Its inflatable tanks were deflated. Its sound trucks stood silent. The artists and dreamers who had once painted illusions across battlefields returned to quiet lives. Some went back to New York, to studios, classrooms, and design rooms. Some returned to families who never truly knew what they had done in secret. They were never awarded medals. Their missions remained hidden in classified files. Their courage unspoken. But in time, the truth began to surface. And when it did, the world saw something extraordinary. That in a war filled with destruction and blood, there were men who chose to fight with creativity, who used deception not to kill, but to save lives. The Ghost Army proved a simple truth. That imagination can be mightier than firepower. In their hands, art became armor. Sound became strategy. Illusion became salvation. Their story stands today as one of the most powerful examples of how human creativity can change history. Because war, at its heart, is a battle of minds. And these men won that battle. Their legacy did not end in 1945. Their techniques in psychological warfare shaped modern intelligence for generations. Every fake radio signal, every staged convoy, every piece of digital misinformation used in modern warfare can trace its roots to the Ghost Army. Beyond the military, Their influence reached the world of art and design. Bill Blass brought elegance and precision to American fashion. Ellsworth Kelly transformed modern art with bold shapes and colors. Their battlefield creativity became part of their artistic DNA. What began as survival in war became inspiration for a new world. When historians interviewed the last surviving members of the Ghost Army, they didn't speak with pride about tricking the enemy. They spoke with pride about saving lives. One veteran said, "We didn't need to pull a trigger to make a difference. We painted, we built, we faked, and we saved thousands." And perhaps that is what made them heroes. While artists fought with sound and light, spies in Britain perfected the art of deception. Operation Mincemeat became a cornerstone of modern espionage, proof that the human mind could be deadlier than any weapon. The image of Major William Martin, the man who never was, remains one of the most haunting symbols of World War II, a man who never lived, but whose death changed everything. He too became a ghost, one whose mission was to protect the living. Deception had become an art form, an art of survival, an art of hope. But when peace finally came, new truths emerged. Millions of soldiers returned home, carrying invisible wounds, from chemicals, from trauma, from the weight of believing in glory. In Germany, pervert and addiction haunted veterans for decades. In the United States and Britain, the deception units, the artists, the sound men, the dreamers, returned quietly. Many went unrecognized. Some were haunted by memories of a war fought not with bullets, but with illusions. And yet, despite everything, many said they would do it again, because for them, every fake tank they built was a real life saved. As the years passed, technology evolved, but the spirit of the Ghost Army lived on. In film, in art, in storytelling, they showed the world that the line between creativity and survival is thinner than anyone imagined. Today, in museums across the United States, their artifacts still stand as silent witnesses. Rubber tanks, wooden rifles, recording equipment, sketches drawn under enemy skies. Visitors who walk those halls see more than relics. They see imagination under fire. They see creativity used to protect, not destroy. They see proof that even in darkness, the human spirit finds a way to create light. In 2013, the U.S. Congress officially recognized the Ghost Army. The few survivors, now elderly and frail, stood to receive applause and tears for a secret they had kept for 70 years. The ceremony was quiet, but the message was loud. That art, courage, and deception had once saved the world. And that even in madness, there is room for imagination, for compassion, and for brilliance. When we look back at World War II, we remember battles, generals, and destruction. But hidden between those pages are stories like these. Stories of ghosts, of illusion, of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. The Ghost Army. Operation Mincemeat. Nicholas Alchemade, the man who fell from heaven and lived. 3 stories, different yet bound by one truth, that even in humanity's darkest hour, creativity, chance, and courage kept the world alive. The artist with a brush, the spy with a plan, the airman with a miracle. Each fought in their own way, and together, they remind us of something eternal. That war may test destruction's limits, but it also reveals the boundless power of the human spirit. Because sometimes, victory doesn't come from the strongest army or the biggest gun. Sometimes, it comes from a mind brave enough to imagine a different ending.